The alien warrior woman overheard me. Then she called me to her room. HFY, the intergalactic outpost, was a bustling hub of activity. Humans, aliens, and all manner of species moved through the corridors, going about their duties in a place that existed on the edge of known space. The protagonist, a skilled human diplomat named Alex, was stationed here for a delicate mission, one that could either solidify humanity's place in the galaxy or create new enemies for Earth. Alex had always been good at his job. He was known for his calm demeanor in the face of tense situations and his ability to find common ground, even when the odds seemed impossible. He had worked with several alien species, and although many of them viewed humans with suspicion, Alex had a knack for breaking through those barriers. But today, he wasn't working on any diplomatic negotiations. He was taking a break from the pressure, enjoying a rare moment of peace in the mess hall of the outpost. The large cafeteria was filled with a mix of humans and aliens, each group seated together in separate corners of the room. The hum of conversation was punctuated by the clinking of trays and the low buzz of food preparation in the background. Alex sat at one of the tables, sipping his drink and casually observing the others. His eyes wandered over the various alien species that shared the space, noting their differences in appearance and behavior. Most of them were familiar faces, creatures he had encountered before during his time here. But today, something caught his attention, something unusual. A group of alien warriors sat at a table across the room, speaking in a language that Alex couldn't fully understand, though he recognized enough to know they were discussing strategy. Their voices were low but intense, and their body language suggested that they were in the middle of an important conversation. At the center of this group was one alien in particular who stood out from the rest, a woman whose mere presence seemed to command respect. She was tall, nearly a head taller than most of the others at the table, with a powerful build that spoke of a life spent in combat. Her skin was a deep, rich shade of green, and her long, dark hair was tied back in intricate braids that only enhanced her fierce appearance. Her name was Rithana, and she was one of the most feared warriors in her species. A commander in their military, she had earned her reputation through countless battles, each one adding to her legend. But what caught Alex's attention wasn't just her appearance, it was the way she carried herself. There was a certain grace in her movements, a quiet confidence that made it clear she was someone who had seen and survived things most would never understand. As he watched her, Alex overheard a few words in their conversation that made him pause. They were talking about him. Specifically, they were discussing his role in recent diplomatic efforts between the human and alien factions. The tone of their voices was respectful, even admiring, though there was a touch of skepticism in the air. He didn't know what they thought of him, but from the way they spoke, he could tell that Rithana had an opinion about his methods, an opinion that was far more positive than the others in the room. Alex shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He wasn't used to being the subject of conversation, especially not among such powerful figures. He had learned over the years to blend into the background, to remain unobtrusive in the midst of alien leaders and soldiers. But as he sat there, trying to avoid being noticed, something unexpected happened. Rithana's eyes suddenly met his from across the room. It was as if the entire room had quieted for a moment. Time seemed to stretch as their gazes locked. There was no anger or animosity in her eyes, only a sharp, calculating focus. Alex felt a chill run down his spine, as though he were under some kind of scrutiny that he couldn't escape. He had dealt with dangerous individuals before, but this was different. There was something about Rithana that made him feel as if she were seeing right through him. Then, without a word, Rithana stood up from her seat. The other warriors at the table seemed to fall silent, watching her with a mixture of respect and curiosity. She didn't speak to them, nor did she acknowledge anyone else in the room. She simply began walking toward him, her steps steady and purposeful. Alex's heart began to race. He had never interacted with Rithana directly, but he had heard enough stories about her to know that she was a force to be reckoned with. Her reputation as a ruthless commander had made her both feared and respected throughout the galaxy. The idea that she was walking toward him, as if summoned by some unseen force, sent a ripple of tension through the room. As she drew closer, the others began to shift in their seats, exchanging uncertain glances. Alex felt every eye in the room on him now, but he couldn't tear his gaze away from Rithana. She was a towering figure, and as she approached, It was impossible not to feel the weight of her presence. When she reached his table, Rithana stopped just in front of him. For a moment there was nothing but silence. Alex could hear the pounding of his own heart in his ears, and he felt the eyes of the entire room still focused on him. Then, in a voice that was calm yet commanding, she spoke his name. Alex. Her voice was deep and rich, carrying an authority that made it clear she wasn't accustomed to being ignored. The way she said his name was unlike anything he had heard before. There was no malice in it, but there was something about the way it lingered in the air that made him feel like he was being drawn into something much larger than himself. Without waiting for him to respond, she turned and began walking toward the door. Alex hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to do. This wasn't a situation he had prepared for. He had always been able to navigate the complexities of diplomacy, but this was something else entirely. Rithana was a warrior, not a politician, and she wasn't speaking to him like an ally or a fellow diplomat. She was speaking to him as if he were something far more important, something she needed, or perhaps something she wanted. The sound of her footsteps echoed in the silence, and the eyes of the room remained fixed on Alex, waiting for him to make his move. He wasn't sure why, but something about the way Rithana had looked at him, something about the way she had called his name, told him he couldn't just sit there and ignore the invitation. He stood up slowly, his mind racing with questions, but he didn't have time to answer them. He simply followed her down the hallway, unsure of what was about to happen, but feeling an undeniable pull to see it through. The further they walked, the more intense the silence became. The outpost's corridors were long and sterile, lit by harsh artificial lights that flickered faintly in the distance. Rithana's pace never slowed, and Alex had to quicken his steps to keep up. His mind was full of questions. Why had she called him? What did she want from him? Was this a trap, or was it something else entirely? Eventually, they reached her quarters, and Rithana stopped in front of the door. She turned to face him, her gaze unreadable. "Come in," she said simply before stepping inside. Alex hesitated for a moment. He had no idea what to expect, but something deep within him told him that this moment was more significant than he could imagine. With a deep breath, he stepped inside. The door slid shut behind him. The door slid shut behind Alex with a soft hiss, and the quiet hum of the outpost's mechanical systems seemed to disappear in the stillness of Rithana's quarters. The room was a stark contrast to the mess hall. Unlike the bustling, crowded spaces of the outpost, Rithana's quarters were quiet, almost eerie in their simplicity. The walls were lined with weapons, long spears, curved blades, and armor that looked like it had seen countless battles. The air smelled of metal and leather, a scent that reminded Alex of the battlefield, though the room itself was immaculate, free of the clutter that sometimes accumulated in the living spaces of other warriors. Rithana stood just inside the doorway, her back to him, her posture straight and proud. She didn't speak immediately, but Alex could feel her presence, her energy filling the space between them. He wasn't sure what to say or do. This was unlike any meeting he had ever experienced in his career. He had negotiated with diplomats, had worked with scientists, even managed tense peace talks, but standing here in front of Rithana, one of the most feared warriors in the galaxy, he was unsure of his place. His thoughts were interrupted when she turned toward him, her eyes locking onto his with an intensity that sent a shiver down his spine. There was no malice in her gaze, but it was intense, almost like she was studying him, trying to figure him out in ways he hadn't expected. She took a slow step toward him, her eyes never leaving his face. Alex swallowed hard, feeling the weight of her gaze, but he stood his ground. He wasn't afraid of her. He had dealt with warriors before, but there was something different about Rithana. Her presence alone made him feel small, insignificant in a way that was hard to describe. "Sit," she said, her voice as commanding as ever, but there was a hint of something else there too, something softer. It wasn't an order, but more like a suggestion made with a quiet authority that demanded respect. Without a word, Alex moved to one of the chairs near the small table, hesitating only for a moment before sitting down. Rithana didn't sit across from him, though. Instead, she paced slowly around the room, her boots echoing softly on the metal floor. The sound was oddly calming, almost hypnotic. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Alex tried to keep his composure, but the silence was becoming unbearable. He wanted to ask her what this was all about, why she had summoned him here, but he wasn't sure if he should. He had been trained to approach situations with caution, especially when dealing with beings as unpredictable as Rathana. So instead of speaking, he simply waited, watching her move around the room. She was a striking figure, even more so up close. Her movements were fluid, graceful despite her size, and there was an undeniable strength in the way she carried herself. Everything about her seemed to radiate power and control. Finally, Rathana stopped in front of a large, ornate weapon mounted on the wall. Alex couldn't tell exactly what kind of weapon it was. Its design was unlike anything he had ever seen. It was a long, curved blade, shimmering with an almost unnatural glow. The edges of the blade were etched with intricate markings that seemed to tell a story, though Alex didn't recognize the language. Rathana stood in front of the weapon for a long time, almost as if lost in thought. Alex didn't dare interrupt. When she spoke again, her voice was softer, almost distant. "I have been a warrior for most of my life," she said. "It is all I know: battle, survival, conquest. It has shaped everything about me, every decision, every relationship." She paused, turning slightly to face Alex, her eyes narrowing slightly. "But there is more to strength than just victory in battle. I know this now more than I ever did before." Alex leaned forward in his seat, intrigued by her words. He wasn't sure where this conversation was heading, but he knew it was important. The way she spoke, so carefully, as though weighing every word, told him that something was weighing heavily on her mind. "Your people," Rathana continued, her voice growing more intense, "you are different from us. Your strength is not in the physical, in the weapon you wield, but in something else, something I can't quite understand." Alex swallowed, unsure of how to respond. He had been around long enough to know that what Rathana was saying was not something she would admit lightly. She was a warrior, and for her to acknowledge the difference between humans and her people meant that there was something about humanity that she respected, even admired. But what could that be? What was it that made humans different from the other species she had encountered? "You are a race of survivors," she said, her eyes fixed on him, as though she were daring him to deny it. "Despite everything, you continue to exist. You have been tested in ways that no one should have to endure, and yet you keep fighting. You endure, adapt, and evolve." Alex felt a surge of pride at her words. He had always known that humans had a unique resilience, an ability to push forward in the face of adversity. But hearing it from someone like Rathana, someone who had lived through battles that most would consider impossible to survive, made him appreciate it in a new light. "It's not just about surviving," Alex replied, his voice steady. "It's about building something. We don't just fight to stay alive, we fight to create a future. We fight to make things better even when it seems impossible." Rathana looked at him, her gaze softer now, though there was still a hint of challenge in her eyes. "That is what I don't understand. We fight for dominance, for control. We fight to win, but you, your people, fight for something else, something greater." She took a step closer to him, her expression unreadable. "I wanted to understand it. That's why I called you here." The tension in the room thickened. Alex wasn't sure what she was asking for, answers, perhaps, or something more. But the air between them felt charged, like they were standing on the edge of something monumental. He could sense that this wasn't just a casual conversation. This was something more, something deeper. "Rathana," Alex began, choosing his words carefully. "I don't have all the answers, but I can tell you this. Humans don't give up, not easily. We fight because we believe in something. We fight for the future, for the ones we love. We fight to protect what matters." She tilted her head slightly as though processing his words. There was a long silence as she seemed to weigh what he had said. Finally, she nodded once, a slow, deliberate gesture. "I think I understand," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "You are different from us. But perhaps that is not such a bad thing." The words hung in the air between them, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The room felt impossibly still, as though the universe itself were holding its breath. It was clear that something had shifted between them. An understanding had begun to form, one that neither could have predicted. Alex had always known that diplomacy was about more than just words, but in this moment, it felt as though something more had been unlocked. Something deeper than mere conversation. Rathana turned away from him, pacing again, but this time, the tension in her movements had softened. She seemed lost in thought, her mind working through the weight of the conversation. Alex remained where he sat, watching her carefully. He knew that whatever came next would be significant. He just didn't know how it would change things for both of them. After a long moment, Rathana stopped and faced him again. There is more to this, Alex, she said, more that I need to understand. But for now, she trailed off, her eyes locking onto his once again. For now, I will let you go, but know this, our conversation is far from over. Alex nodded, a quiet understanding passing between them. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain. This encounter would change everything. The days that followed were strange for Alex. He found himself constantly replaying the conversation with Rathana in his mind, trying to understand what it all meant. There was something about her, something he couldn't quite grasp. She was a warrior through and through, her entire life shaped by combat and conquest. Yet in their brief exchange, she had shown him a side of herself that few ever got to see. It was clear that Rathana respected him in some way, perhaps more than she had ever respected another human. But there was still so much about her, and her people, that Alex didn't understand. What did she want from him? Why had she called him to her quarters? Was this a diplomatic move, or something deeper? In the days that followed, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that the quiet respect Rathana had shown him was only the surface of something far more complicated. There were moments when their paths crossed in the hallways of the outpost, and each time he caught glimpses of that same intensity in her eyes. She didn't speak much after that first conversation, but her gaze was enough to make him feel like there was always something unsaid hanging between them. He wasn't sure if it was the weight of the unspoken or the ever-present tension that made every interaction with her feel like it was building towards something, but it was becoming harder to ignore. On the fourth day after their meeting, Alex was called into the outpost's command center for an unexpected meeting with the top leaders of the various species stationed there. It was a routine meeting, one where human diplomats were expected to provide updates on the status of their relations with other species and to discuss potential conflicts that might arise. Alex had attended dozens of these meetings, but this time felt different. The air seemed thick with unspoken words, and the usual politeness was laced with an underlying tension that Alex couldn't place. When he walked into the command center, Rathana was already there, standing at the far end of the room, her arms crossed over her chest. She stood out not just because of her height or the strength in her posture, but because of the way she seemed completely unbothered by the presence of others. While most of the diplomats and military leaders were seated, waiting for the meeting to begin, Rathana stood at attention, her gaze unwavering as she watched everyone around her. Alex wasn't sure if he should approach her or simply take a seat like the others. As he hesitated, their eyes met for a brief moment, and once again that familiar chill ran down his spine. Rathana didn't break the gaze this time, and Alex felt the weight of her presence more than ever before. There was something almost magnetic about the way she looked at him, an unspoken challenge, as if she were daring him to step into the unknown with her. He sat down at the table, his mind racing. The other leaders were speaking now, discussing matters of trade and security, but Alex's attention kept drifting back to Rathana. She was silent, her gaze never leaving the room, but there was a sense of anticipation hanging in the air. The longer she stood there, the more Alex felt that something important was about to unfold. It was when the conversation shifted to a new potential conflict, one involving an alien species on the outer edges of the galaxy, that Rathana finally spoke. Her voice was calm, but there was an edge to it, a sharpness that cut through the conversation like a blade. "I think we need to consider the human perspective on this," she said, her voice carrying across the room. Everyone stopped talking immediately, turning to face her. The room had grown quiet, and Alex could feel the eyes of the other leaders on him. He wasn't sure why, but he had the distinct feeling that Rathana was making some kind of statement, not just to the others, but to him as well. "Humanity has faced countless threats," she continued, her voice steady. "And you've survived. Perhaps there is something in that survival that we have not yet understood. We should listen to what Alex has to say." Alex felt his heart beat faster. He wasn't expecting this. He had been prepared to sit quietly and listen, to offer his input when necessary, but now Rathana was putting him on the spot. The eyes of the room were all on him, and for a moment he felt exposed, but there was no turning back now. He cleared his throat, trying to steady his nerves. "I agree with Rathana," he said, his voice stronger than he felt. "Humanity has faced threats from all sides, and while we are not the most powerful species in the galaxy, we have something others lack. We have a unique ability to adapt, to innovate, and to overcome even the most insurmountable odds. He paused for a moment, looking around the room. If we approach this situation the way we've approached past conflicts, by relying on brute strength alone, we'll fail. The key to winning this isn't in what we can destroy, but in how we can think differently. How we can outsmart the enemy. That's how humanity survives. There was a long silence after he spoke. Alex could feel the weight of the room's gaze on him, but it was Rithana's expression that caught his attention the most. She was watching him closely, her eyes narrowed as though she were considering something deeply important. For a brief moment their gazes locked again, and Alex could see the faintest flicker of something in her eyes, a kind of respect but also something else, something that made his heart race. When she spoke again, her voice was softer but still firm. "Humanity's strength is in its adaptability," she said. "I see that now. Perhaps we've been too focused on our own ways. Maybe it's time for us to learn something new." The room was silent for a few moments, and then the discussion resumed, though the atmosphere had shifted. The other leaders were now looking at Alex with a mix of curiosity and respect. Rithana's endorsement had changed the dynamic, and Alex could feel the weight of the moment settling over him. After the meeting, as the other leaders began to file out of the room, Alex remained seated. Rithana lingered near the door, waiting for him to finish. When everyone had left, she finally turned to him, her eyes sharp but not unkind. "Your words have weight, Alex," she said, her voice low. "I had no doubt about your ability to lead, but now I see something more. Your people are not just survivors, they are visionaries." Alex wasn't sure how to respond. He had always known that humans had a special resilience, but hearing it from someone like Rithana, someone who had seen countless battles and had lived through them, meant more than words could express. He stood up from the table, his mind racing. "Thank you," he said quietly. "But I'm just one person. It's the people who fight together that make the difference." Rithana nodded slowly. "That is true, but sometimes it takes one person to show others the way." With that, she turned and walked toward the door, pausing just before stepping out. "I'll see you later, Alex," she said over her shoulder, her tone no longer as cold as it had been before. Alex watched her leave, his heart pounding. He wasn't sure what was happening between them, but he felt a strange sense of purpose rising within him. Whatever came next, he knew one thing for certain. He had crossed a threshold, and there was no going back now. Rithana had seen something in him, and he wasn't sure what it meant yet, but he would find out. For the first time, Alex felt like he was part of something much larger than himself. And the future, whatever it held, suddenly felt full of possibilities. In the days that followed the meeting, Alex found himself caught between two worlds. The work of diplomacy continued as usual. He attended briefings, meetings, and diplomatic dinners, all while trying to maintain the balance between the different species and their often conflicting interests. But his mind kept returning to Rithana. What had she meant by her words? She had shown him a level of respect and admiration that was rare in the galaxy. But there was still something in her eyes, something unreadable, that made him wonder if there was more to her interest than just his diplomatic skills. Their brief conversation had only scratched the surface of a deeper connection. She saw something in him, something more than just a diplomat. He could tell from the way she looked at him, from the way she listened. But he wasn't sure if she was simply testing him, or if there was something more personal at play. Whatever it was, Alex couldn't deny that there was an undeniable pull between them, a tension that he couldn't shake. One afternoon, Alex was walking through the outpost's central hub when he saw Rithana again. She was standing near a window, her back to him, her eyes scanning the stars. Her posture was stiff, but there was something else about her in this moment, a vulnerability that he hadn't noticed before. She wasn't the warrior in that moment. She was simply a person who had been shaped by her experiences, her struggles, and the battles she had fought. Alex hesitated for a moment, unsure whether he should approach her. It wasn't like the previous encounters, where he had been called into a meeting or had a reason to speak. This time it felt personal, but he didn't want to intrude. He had learned the hard way that people like Rithana, warriors who had lived through unimaginable things, didn't always welcome others into their private spaces. But something in the air told him that this time was different. He took a deep breath and walked up to her slowly, quietly. When she turned around, her face was impassive, but her eyes softened when she saw him. "Alex," she said, her voice almost a whisper, as if she hadn't expected him to come. "You don't need to be here." He smiled, though the tension in his chest didn't ease. "Maybe not, but here I am." Rithana looked at him for a long moment as if she were trying to read his thoughts. Then she stepped aside and motioned for him to join her at the window. The vast expanse of space stretched out before them, a sea of stars and distant planets. There was something calming about the view, something that made Alex feel small but also connected to something much larger than himself. "This is what I fight for," Rithana said, her voice low, almost as though she were speaking to herself. "Not just the battlefields or the victories, it's this, what lies beyond, the future." Alex glanced at her, trying to understand. "I thought you fought for your people." She nodded slowly, but her eyes were distant. "I do, but I fight for more than that. I fight because at some point I started believing there could be a future without endless fighting, without the need for bloodshed." She paused. "But that future requires change, Alex. Real change, and I'm not sure if I'm ready for that." Her words hung in the air between them, and Alex could feel the weight of them. He had never seen this side of her before, the side that questioned everything she had fought for, the side that wondered if peace was even possible. "You don't have to do it alone," Alex said quietly. "I'm here, we're here. If you want to change things, you don't have to carry the burden by yourself." Rithana turned her gaze toward him, her expression unreadable. For a moment there was a flicker of something in her eyes, something like doubt or fear, but it was quickly replaced by the familiar steely determination that he had come to know. "Change is never easy," she said. "Especially when it means going against everything you've been taught, everything you've known your entire life." She glanced back out the window, her gaze intense. "But maybe you're right. Maybe there's a way to make a difference, but it's not going to be easy." Alex nodded, his mind racing with the possibilities. He had known from the beginning that his role here wasn't just about politics. It was about something more, something bigger. He had been thrust into this galaxy of different species, each with their own culture and ways of doing things, but it was clear now that humanity had something special to offer. And so did Rithana. She had already proven that she was more than just a warrior. She had the vision, the strength, and the heart to bring about change. It was just a matter of finding the courage to take that first step. "We can make it work," Alex said, his voice steady. "Together." Rithana's lips twitched slightly, almost as if she were going to smile, but the moment passed quickly. She turned back to the window, her hands resting at her sides. "I hope you're right," she said softly. For a while, neither of them spoke. They stood side by side, staring out at the stars, each lost in their own thoughts. The silence between them was comfortable, almost soothing. It wasn't awkward or heavy. It was just two people standing together, sharing a quiet understanding. Eventually, Rithana turned to face him again. Her expression was more serious now, but there was a softness in her eyes that Alex hadn't seen before. "You've earned my respect, Alex," she said quietly. "But respect isn't enough. If you're going to stand with me, you'll need to understand something important." Alex raised an eyebrow, wondering where this conversation was going. "The path we're about to take won't be easy. There will be those who won't accept it, who will resist. They'll fight us every step of the way. Some of them are my own people. I'm not sure if they'll ever understand, but they need to. I need to make them see that there's more to life than war and conquest." She took a step closer to him, her gaze unwavering. "You'll need to stand with me, Alex, not just as a diplomat, but as someone who believes in the future we can build together. Are you ready for that?" Alex felt a surge of determination rise within him. He had always believed in peace, in the possibility of a better future. But hearing Rithana's words, seeing the resolve in her eyes, made him realize that this wasn't just about words. It was about action. It was about fighting for what they both believed in, no matter the cost. "I'm ready," he said, his voice firm. Rithana studied him for a moment as though weighing his words. Then she nodded. "Good," she said. "Then let's begin." With that, Rithana turned and walked toward the door. Alex followed her, his heart pounding with excitement and uncertainty. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure. He had made a choice. And now, together, they would take the first step toward a new beginning. The days after their quiet conversation by the window were filled with both uncertainty and hope. Alex knew that things were changing. He could feel it in the air. There was a new energy in the outpost, a sense that something was beginning to stir beneath the surface. It wasn't just the work of diplomacy anymore. This was something deeper, something personal. He had made a choice to stand with Rithana, to fight not just for peace, but for a new future, one where war and conquest weren't the only options. Over the next few days, Rithana became more than just a warrior to Alex. She was a partner in a cause, an ally in a shared vision. The two of them began to strategize together, speaking in private about what needed to change, what steps could be taken to shift the balance. They knew that the road ahead would be difficult, perhaps even dangerous. There would be those who resisted, those who didn't understand the vision they were working toward. But despite all of that, Alex felt a quiet confidence. He wasn't alone anymore, and neither was Rithana. They began to meet more often, working together to craft a plan for how they could challenge the status quo. Alex brought his experience with diplomacy, his knowledge of human history and strategy, while Rithana brought the weight of her battle-hardened wisdom. The more they talked, the more they realized how much they could accomplish together. There was a balance between them, her strength and his intellect, her experience and his adaptability. As the days passed, Alex noticed that Rithana was no longer the distant figure she had once been. She laughed more, even if it was a quiet, guarded kind of laughter. She shared stories with him, stories of her homeworld, of the battles she had fought, and of the warriors she had trained. Through these stories, Alex began to see a different side of her, a side that wasn't defined solely by combat and strength, but by the same desires he had, a longing for something better, something more than what had always been. But even with this newfound understanding between them, the challenges were far from over. The harder they worked to create change, the more they realized just how deeply entrenched the old ways were. Resistance came swiftly. The first signs were subtle, disapproving glances from other officers, whispers behind closed doors. Then came the more overt signs, threats, pressure from the leaders of other factions, and attempts to undermine their efforts at every turn. One evening, as Alex and Rithana sat together in her quarters discussing their next steps, the door slid open unexpectedly. A figure stepped into the room, one that Alex recognized instantly. It was Daruk, a high-ranking officer from Rithana's military faction. He had been a staunch supporter of the old ways, and Alex knew that his arrival wasn't a good sign. "Rithana," Daruk's voice was cold, but there was an unmistakable undercurrent of urgency. "You've gone too far, this alliance with the human, this dream of peace. It will destroy everything we've worked for." Rithana didn't flinch. She stood up slowly, her posture as commanding as ever. "I haven't gone too far, Daruk. I'm trying to build a future where we don't have to fight every day, where we can finally have peace." Daruk's gaze shifted to Alex, his expression filled with disdain. "You think a human can help us do that? They're nothing but survivors clinging to whatever they can. They don't understand our ways. They never will." Alex stood, meeting Daruk's gaze without fear. He had faced far worse in his time as a diplomat, but this felt different. This wasn't just a political argument. This was a challenge to everything he and Rithana had been working toward. "We may be survivors, Daruk," Alex said calmly, "but that doesn't mean we don't understand the value of peace. We've learned the hard way how much we have to lose." Daruk sneered, taking a step forward, clearly unafraid of the human in front of him. "You think your words will change anything? We've been at war for centuries, and you think some human ideal of peace will fix it? It's naive." Rithana's voice was firm now, a quiet authority in her tone. "No, Daruk. What's naive is thinking that we can continue on this path forever. It's going to destroy us all if we don't change." Daruk didn't respond immediately, his eyes flicking between Rithana and Alex. For a moment, the tension in the room was unbearable. Finally, he spoke again, his words dripping with bitterness. "You'll regret this, Rithana, mark my words." With one last glare, Daruk turned and left the room, leaving the two of them in silence. Rithana let out a slow breath, as if she had been holding it for a long time. She didn't look at Alex, but he could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "I knew it was coming," she said softly, her voice more vulnerable than he had ever heard it. "The resistance. The ones who don't want change, who don't want to let go of the old ways." Alex stepped closer to her, his voice steady. "You can't let them stop you. This is bigger than just them, bigger than just us. You're fighting for something that could change everything." She turned to face him, her eyes filled with a fire that he recognized, the same determination he had seen the first time they spoke. "I know, but it's hard, Alex. They've been in power for so long, and now they see me as a threat. They'll do everything in their power to stop me." Alex nodded, understanding the weight of her words. The road ahead would be difficult, and they would face more opposition than they could possibly imagine. But he wasn't going to let her do it alone. They had come too far and they had too much at stake now. "You're not alone, Rithana," he said quietly. "We're in this together. Whatever happens next, we'll face it side by side." Her gaze softened for a moment, and for a brief second, Alex saw the warrior in her relax. She had always carried the weight of her people's expectations on her shoulders, but in that moment she allowed herself to lean on him, if only for a second. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not used to relying on anyone, but I think I'm starting to understand what it means to fight for something greater than myself." Alex smiled, though the uncertainty of what was to come weighed heavily on him. He didn't know how the others would react to their plans, or how far the resistance would go to stop them. But he knew one thing for sure: they were in this together. They had a vision, and they would fight for it. The next few weeks were a blur of meetings, strategy sessions, and tense negotiations. The resistance grew louder, but so did the voices of those who supported Rithana's cause. More and more people came forward, offering their support, willing to fight for the change they knew was possible. It wasn't just about fighting for survival anymore. It was about fighting for a future, one where peace wasn't a distant dream but a tangible reality. And then, one day, the first major breakthrough came. Rithana and Alex had been working tirelessly to bring the various factions together, and finally, they secured a meeting with the leaders of the resistance. The meeting was set to take place in the command center of the outpost, where the fate of their efforts would be decided. As Alex and Rithana stood before the large table, surrounded by the leaders of both their faction and the resistance, Alex could feel the weight of the moment. This was it. This was the turning point. If they succeeded, they would change the course of history. If they failed, everything they had worked for could crumble. The room was filled with tension as the discussions began. There were heated words, raised voices, and even moments of silence as the leaders deliberated. But through it all, Alex and Rithana stood side by side, unwavering in their belief that peace was possible. They listened, they spoke, and they fought for every inch of ground. And slowly, piece by piece, the resistance began to soften. The voices of those who had once opposed them started to listen, to understand that peace wasn't weakness, it was strength. It wasn't about giving up power, it was about sharing it. It was about building a future where no one had to live in fear of war. By the time the meeting ended, the first steps toward peace had been taken. There was still much work to be done, many battles to be fought, and sacrifices to be made. But in that room, Alex and Rithana had done the impossible. They had planted the seeds of a new future. As they walked out of the command center together, Alex felt a surge of hope he hadn't known he was capable of. The fight wasn't over, but it had changed. And for the first time, Alex truly believed that peace was not just a dream. It was a reality within their grasp. And whatever the future held, they would face it together.